everyone. Good day.
Hi.
So it's the 50th anniversary of the Earth Day. So we're here having the first ever Global Shapers Manila webinar. So our first topic would be on climate change and how are we going to move forward as we also fight against this global pandemic. Now, we have here four beautiful and commendable human beings trying to fight against climate change. And right now, we are doing this so that we can also share what we know to everyone. And hopefully, through this, we can also do our part and do our share for the environment. All right, so for this webinar, our format would be 5 minutes will be given to each speaker to present, and 15 minutes for the question and answer. Now, to introduce the Global Shapers, may I call on Hillary Howe?
Okay. Hi, guys. So, well said, Rage. So, again, in line with our celebration for Earth Day, we actually have three speakers for this webinar, and moderated by Rage and myself. So just a brief introduction for Rage and myself. So Rage is an innovation specialist for Plan International, an international humanitarian NGO for children and girls' rights. Me, I am Hillary. I'm a business development associate at HC Infrastructure, an infrastructure company. For our speakers, we have Ann Dumaliang, who is a trustee at Masungi Geo Reserve, one of the, I would say, movers and shakers in the conservation space here in the Philippines. We also have Joshua Lopez, the program lead at Reboot Philippines. And Reboot is engaged in training youth leaders in climate and energy. And last but not the least, we have Tiaza Santos, who is the Global Shapers regional lead for Asia Pacific on climate and environment. So, Rage, back to you on the topics that we'll be covering for this webinar.
Thank you, Hillary. So for the topics, we have Tiaza, who will be talking about planetary limits and boundaries. And we'll be talking about importance and the struggles of doing conservation efforts. And finally, Joshua will be talking about environment-related innovation and technology. So, let's start.
Okay, hi everyone. So I want to start with this discussion on the Earth's limits and implications for the future. As a way for me to set the context of this discussion, we've been talking about climate change and how to protect the Earth and the natural ecosystem. But I think it's important for us to understand what are the limits or the capacity of this planet, and why is it important to do so. Okay. But first, let me start with a very simple analogy. The Earth is a system, just as the human digestive system. We know that each part is unique. It has a unique and complicated system, and each part of that digestive system performs a specific function, but all are interconnected. So the mouth, the stomach, the esophagus, and so forth. And this entire digestive system allows us to, as the name suggests, digest food. It helps distribute nutrients to our body and allows us to remove waste and toxins. So each part has a function. Now, another good analogy would be a car. A car system has subsystems such as the brake system, but that part alone is very intricate and interconnected, and it performs similarly a specific function, but cannot function without being connected to another part. I also want to just briefly talk about the city as a system of subsystems. So there's complexity within a city. There's demand and supply in terms of economic activity and how basic goods and services are delivered from input to production to output. The energy networks that provides us with transmission lines, substations, and this is how we get our electricity for our day-to-day needs. Mobility, such as transport and road networks, water systems, and even as simple and as basic as the social system comprised of neighborhoods and our just the usual human relations. Now, in terms of the Earth, in terms of our planet, there are specific ecosystems such as a coral reef, for instance, which is one of the basic systems that I can also think of. It's a marine underwater ecosystem characterized by reef-building corals, and it's a formation of colonies of coral polyps held together by calcium carbonate, and these polyps cluster into groups. And this whole coral reef, such as the Great Barrier Reef and the Coral Triangle in our region, has purpose and benefits for protection. Purpose and benefits of how this is designed. And based on studies, over 500 million people depend on reefs for food, income, and protection. Protection for coastlines from storms and erosion, provision of livelihood for local communities, as well as providing them cultural significance, especially for indigenous communities living in that area. As mentioned, provides a livelihood for local communities. It also serves as a recreation area for recreation and tourism, and also as a source of medicine. So these are just basic systems that we can think of. But in terms of the global planetary system, it's more complicated than that. And just basic science 101, the Earth on its own is also a system, and it's comprised of four major subsystems, which is the atmosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, and the geosphere. And under these four major subsystems are a number of subsystems. So you'll be hearing a lot of these systems from me throughout my discussion. And the idea of the Earth system is that it supports the overall function and process of life on Earth. So basically, this is where we live. This is the blue dot in the universe. So this is where life is formed, and the processes that happen in the Earth system occur naturally, such as the nitrogen cycle and the more commonly known as the water cycle, and so on. And the interaction of these systems provide the condition upon which human societies, our society, depend on. And any tip in the balance can result to severe consequences. And therefore, at present, because of human activity, we are experiencing a major global shift as a result of economic activities, from changes in the urban setting, deforestation, ocean acidification. And scientists have coined this term as the Anthropocene. Basically, it's the human capacity or human ability to make significant change to the function of the Earth system. Now, there were two scientists, Johann Rockstrom and Will Steffen, who in 2009 coined the term planetary boundaries, and this is where the core of my discussion comes in. We've been talking about how do we protect the Earth, how do we conserve the environment, and in many discussion, we can see that there are already studies that provide information how do we do this. But the planetary boundaries basically tells us that there are nine environmental boundaries, which are climate change, stratospheric ozone depletion, atmospheric aerosol loading, ocean acidification, biochemical flows, use of fresh water, land system change, and there are other entities that are not yet quantified and being discovered by being studied by scientists. Uh, these nine boundaries does not intend to present a doomsday scenario and cause people to panic. Basically, what it intends to do is it says it provides us a quantifiable measure that allow us to understand the limit of the Earth's natural resources, because everything has a limit, and we cannot keep, just basic logic, we cannot keep using a finite resource and expect that our economic activity, our daily lives will go on if we just keep using all the Earth's resources. And the purpose of these 9 planetary boundaries is to regulate the stability and resilience of the Earth system and processes. So if we go overboard the use of these specific resources, it will tip the balance on how the Earth is how, it will tip the balance on the Earth. And these planetary boundaries are non-negotiable planetary conditions. I want to emphasize on the non-negotiability of these planetary conditions. These conditions are what humanity must respect and maintain in order to avoid catastrophic environmental changes, such as it's non-negotiable that we breathe in oxygen or we take in food to nourish our body or for each part of our body, um, which is important for us to remain alive. So these are what supports the integrity of the planet Earth and support the living conditions of every species in this planet. So I think it's important for us to understand how this works. Now, the planetary boundary also helps us measure how much pressure can we affect the Earth before we pass a point of no return. So there's a certain threshold that we are already challenging. So at present, if you look at the diagram, there are already 4 out of 9 that have now been crossed. So the green zone is basically the safe zone where we can operate. This is where the certain limits of resources can provide and sustain human life on Earth. And the yellow zone is already the zone of uncertainty. Uncertainty. Basically, it's increasing our risk. And the orange zone is already beyond the zone of uncertainty. So in terms of the 9 boundaries, we have already reached beyond the normal operation zone. And 2 of these, climate change and the biosphere integrity, are the core boundaries. Basically, they serve as the pillar to support the overall life on Earth. So now, the question is, how do we live within environmental limits? And I think there are future challenges, but at the same time, even if we are already tipping the balance of the Earth, I still see that there are opportunities that we can explore, and there are already opportunities that are now being explored and happening. And I think this opens the discussion of our next 2 speakers, Joshua and Anne, who can give specific ways on how we can live within the environmental limits.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Tieza.
Thank you.
Wow, I learned a lot. There,
Yeah.
the planetary boundaries is like, okay, there's 9.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's a good tracker of some sort. Yeah.
It's something that allows us to be able to measure, because you cannot make decisions without having any like sort of parameters and
Data.
guidelines in which you can make political, economic, and um, social development decisions.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hear you
So,
on that.
so I think that's a good transition to go to Anne's efforts. So since we have a limited resource, we have these boundaries, then what are we doing right now? Like, so maybe Anne can share what they're doing in terms of the conservation. So Anne, take it away.
Hi guys, I unfortunately do not have a video or a PowerPoint to show everyone, but I hope this still becomes value adding to the discussion at least. I think kanina we've already sufficiently covered why conservation is important, no? Just the idea that all forms of life are really interconnected. And ultimately what we do to nature affects us and affects its ability to take care of us, right? So may that be, instantly or gradually. Instantly, kita natin ngayon how COVID-19
Yeah.
is affecting a lot of people, right?
Mm.
And if you look at the gradual manifestations of destruction of habitats and the environment, you can see that in the water crisis that we have in Metro Manila. So if you look at our case in Masungi, if you zoom in a little bit more, very apparent sa amin what happens when you do not take care of your forest and it affects your water source.
Yeah.
So Anne, just I guess it's just a question for me. When you say
In
it
early
affects,
Mhm.
hello, Anne, sorry, you were saying something, or I guess if I may, a question I have is like, how did the loss of biodiversity or like the lack of conservation of Masungi lead to a shortage of water in the area?
Okay. Are you guys hearing me clearly? I'm getting a little bit choppy.
It seems like you're getting a little weak from my side, but I was able to hear you just now.
Okay. Well, your forest kasi holds very simply, if you look at trees, your trees are the ones through the root systems holding the soil in certain places, diba? So when you remove your trees, this hold on the soil nawawala because of the root system, right? And your soil actually acts as a sponge when it comes to water flows. So if your sponge isn't effective, if your sponge isn't effective, rumaragasa lang yung tubig. And that's how you end up with lots of floods during the rainy season. And not a lot of water stored, right, during the dry season.
Mm.
So I hope napipicture nyo naman kahit papano how that exactly goes. But to make the long story short, that's how the health of your forest or your trees would interconnect with the health of your waterways and your water systems. So it's not just the fact that they will be disappearing or ravaging villages when the rainy season comes. No? If your water isn't filtered properly by the underground drainage systems, you also end up with very poor water quality. And that inevitably will lead to sicknesses, diba? Kapag na-consume siya ng mga tao in our area, before Carlo Delantar's water filtration systems, a lot of our park rangers would actually get diarrhea every now and then. And even in rural communities, you'd find cases where children, babies, would still die because of diarrhea. Can you believe that? So napakalaki ng interconnection, and very clearly you can see this when you stay in an area as close to the forests as us. And again, dito nagsisimula lahat yun, yung ondoy, yung water shortage in Metro Manila. These are things that you guys are noticing now, but environmentalists, conservationists have been trying to call attention to for a very, very long time already. And sana, coming from this experience with COVID-19, with the water crisis, that we opt for the right solutions, right? Because all of these ultimately, there are results of habitat destruction, right? The destruction of our environment, which is our home. And so, if you look at this experience for us in Masungi, what it makes very clear is talagang if you simply refer to just the GDP, that's not going to be enough. It's a poor reflection of the quality of life of people and the quality of life in our planet, right?
Yeah, that's right.
In the mountains, you can have, for example, indigenous people relying on fruits relying on clean water that they can get for free, diba? When a mining company comes in, all of these are removed. All of a sudden, they have to buy their food. All of a sudden, they have to pay for their water. And it gives you a false picture of progress, diba?
Yeah.
People are spending, but they aren't healthy. And they're poor bigla.
Yeah.
So this really ties into what you guys were talking about a while ago on planetary health, how ecosystems and all things are interrelated. So I guess these are things that we will be talking about a little bit more as a discussion mamaya. And actually, if you look at it, um, if I may include in a bit of a cultural angle here, if you listen to the indigenous people, they actually have so much wisdom, so much experience when it comes to coexisting with our natural environment, right? This is actually something we've known
Yeah.
before we were colonized. And the height of deforestation in this country happened in the years when we were colonized. Diba? All of a sudden, from a people who knows how to respect the environment, nature, all of a sudden, we became anthropocentric. Siguro because we believe na rin in a single God in the form of human or something like that. But,
Yeah.
and added to that, the fact na we learned how to take without putting attention to what we will be leaving behind.
Yeah.
Right? Kasi as colonial bodies, I guess at that point, that's just the point of it all, diba? Parang you take resources for your country and you leave things behind. But we forgot to unlearn this and we aren't colonizers. We're from the Philippines. We are in this country, right? And if anything happens to our environment, tayo rin yung mapipinsala at the end of it all. So we need to unlearn this. We need to get over this entire ecological amnesia. That's the term they use for it now. And understand really the role that we play in our ecosystems. Okay, so masyado na ba ang maraming sinabi? I feel like I was blabbing on for too long.
Yeah, actually, those are a lot. Those are very important insights that you have already given to everybody. So thank you so
Okay.
much for that. Yeah.
Meron pa actually other components now because ultimately I want to talk about area-based conservation and restoration. But there are also a few other resets when it comes to participating in conservation that I'd like to share, particularly from our experience. So number one is the idea that when people conserve, what I've realized is a lot of people understand it to be something reactive in nature. When if you look at the word itself, conserving is about making sure that the resource is not depleted, right? That
Yeah.
it isn't consumed to the point that it cannot be restored anymore. So the approach when we do conservation really can't be something that's reactive. Pahabol na lang kapag nasira na lahat. Instead, it has to be something preventive. It has to take into consideration the long-term health of our country, right? It should be something that is integrated in our plans before anything bad happens. Number two, I would say, is some people still have this misconception between conservation and protection. When you're talking about conservation and participating in conservation, it's not about not touching anything at all. Diba? That's impossible. We also have to consume resources. The only point is that we do it sustainably, and that is what conservation calls for. That we protect the resources that we have and consume it in a way that doesn't compromise it for the long haul. Syempre, every now and then, you also have areas that you need to protect, and that simply just has to be integrated in land use planning or urban planning, and all of these things. But ultimately, when someone asks you to participate in conservation, we're not telling you not to consume or not to enjoy, diba?
Yeah.
And
Well, especially
plus,
that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Go
From
on.
the from PS's planetary boundaries, right? Biosphere integrity is already on another level now, wherein it's already risky. Or there's certain level of risk already, I think, if I can
Yeah.
remember correctly. So yeah, we really have to conserve it with the idea of looking forward, like predicting that we have to conserve it because we want it to be we want other generations to use it. The
Mm-hmm.
other other people other people aside from us, after us, there's another generation
Right.
who's gonna use it.
That's
Yeah.
true. Okay. Rage, please talk to me as I go through this. Kasi wala akong picture and wala rin akong slide. But, okay, before jumping on to the next one, the other one that I also feel really strongly for is this entire discussion on sustainability, it can't be hinged on not knowing what we're trying to conserve to start with.
Right.
So there's so much technology, there's so many theories, so many concepts that are popping out, so many solutions, diba? But ultimately, you have to look locally. You have to look at what really is it that you're trying to conserve in your specific spaces. No, so halimbawa, in Masungi, there are many ways that we can apply technology. We can use drones. We can use all of these capital intensive technology to do the restoration work that we're doing, right? But meron actually mga low cost methods unique to our location that we can also opt for, right? You have the indigenous knowledge of people. You have the communities around the area that you can engage in conservation work. There are items you can say that it's a forest ecosystem, but ours is particularly a forest over karst ecosystem, which means a different kind of approach na naman when it comes to restoration. So it
Yeah.
ultimately has to be as localized as can be and without that grounding or understanding, diba? You
Mhm.
can't really say that you're conserving what you're supposed to conserve or what's unique in the places that you're moving. Yeah.
Yeah.
For us in Masungi, what we are particularly interested in is area-based conservation and restoration. And this is especially timely because this decade is actually the UN decade for ecosystem restoration. Are you familiar with this?
For
Are
me,
you guys
first
familiar
time
with this?
hearing it. No, for
Yeah.
me, first time hearing about it.
You guys can read about it a little bit more. Very exciting. Lots of initiatives falling under that. And well, why is this important? Because just looking at our forests and mangrove ecosystems and restoring that actually can already cover about a third of climate mitigation strategies and output that we need in 2030, diba? To mitigate the climate crisis. So, napakalaki actually ng potential contribution niya to avert climate change and keep it at below 2 degrees Celsius. Did I get that right? Yes, below 2 degrees Celsius of a change. And we all know what 2 degrees means, right? It means that we will have an insect extinction that will have a huge impact on our food production and pollinators. We will have, I think, about 90 to 99%. Sorry, I'm just building on retained knowledge of a blow when it comes to your coral reefs. So there are so many things that will change once the climate crisis sets in, and that will be coming in gradually, not like COVID, but the impact will just be as devastating or even more devastating. And in
Yeah.
addition to how it can help with the climate crisis, you can put in this entire discussion pa on ecosystem services, right? How having forests give you not just forest, it gives you a healthy water supply, It prevents erosion, which leads to disasters. It
Yeah.
cleans your air. Diba? It is your natural infrastructure instead of expensive dams, sorry, that you will need to build once your forests are destroyed. So all of
Yep.
these really need to be factored in. And I bet once you do, it will really show that saving forests is worth the while. Okay.
We can now use that last part that you have mentioned so that we can turn it over to Joshua, who can talk with us regarding environment related technology and innovation, since innovation naman can span from low tech to high tech. So thank you so
Okay.
much for your insights, Anne. We will still discuss more siguro on the Q&A session. And then um,
Okay.
so let's proceed to Joshua.
Hey, hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Can hear
Okay.
you.
So I'll just share the screen here. Can you see it?
Start.
Still loading
See
on
it?
my end. There we go. See it. Technology and
Okay.
innovation in the new
In the
climate.
new climate. Yeah. So also again, I'm Joshua. I'm from Reboot Philippines. So it's a youth movement and it's a training program for young leaders on climate and energy. So well, the topic given to me is really broad, no? So as Tiaza explained earlier, environmental issues are it's a whole set of issues that have to be tackled. And similar to what Anne said, uh, addressing environmental issues also talks about conservation issues. In my case, since I'm more working more on the energy transition side, I will focus more here. So technology and innovation, the new climate. When we talk about technology, we have to consider that technology does not exist or it doesn't have a purpose if there are no people using it. So when we talk about technology, we also have to talk about people. And similar to what Tiesa said earlier, um, even though we have like broader planetary systems, we also talk about systems at the human level. So there are social systems, there are political systems, there are economic systems that we also have to take into consideration when we talk about climate issues. So how does climate affect humanity? So yeah, wait lang. So there. So one of the most striking impacts of climate change is the refugee crisis in Europe. So because in 2011, I think there was a drought in the Middle East and in Russia, um, there was an upheaval of people. And then after that, we had the Arab Spring, we had a lot of wars happening in the Middle East. And then these people that you see on the screen, they were forced to go to Europe to find refuge. So if you look at that particular scenario, there's a lot of interconnections with what's happening in our current world. No? So from droughts, you had the refugee crisis, and then a lot of different social and political issues that are happening in Europe, right? We also have something also more, I don't know, more closer to home. During Yolanda, so we all know that Yolanda was described as a super typhoon that's supposed not to happen. But it was so strong because of climate change. And we took years to recover from that particular disaster. And we're expecting, well, unfortunately, we're expecting that more instances of Yolanda will happen in the future as the world warms up. So to simplify the discussion on climate, no. So even though there's a lot of interconnections, there's a lot of issues surrounding climate change. Solving the climate crisis can be simplified into two main um, mechanisms. So first, you have to lessen the emissions, and then secondly, you have to accelerate the absorption of carbon from the atmosphere, so that we will have a net zero or negative carbon in our atmosphere. So technologies, climate technologies, should focus on those two particular um, areas. So first is our technologies or innovations on growing carbon from the atmosphere. No? So here we see a forest. It doesn't look as high tech, no, but it's actually one of the most effective ways to reduce carbon in the atmosphere is to rebuild our ecosystems. Since even before humans, we didn't have any special carbon technologies now that absorb carbon from the atmosphere. We only had trees, we only had algae, and it came a time that we limited the amount of carbon in the atmosphere to a point that the temperature is habitable for humans. Other carbon capture technologies or other carbon capture and sequestration technologies include like absorbing carbon and scrubbing it, and then bringing it inside mines and caves and mixing it with particular minerals and chemicals so that you can put it on the ground. There are a lot of other ways as well, like promoting the growth of algae in particular devices. But personally, and I think the most effective way really is to rebuild the ecosystem, since well we destroy the ecosystem in the process of growing our economy. So might as well rebuild the ecosystem. My main focus, no, and my actual background is on renewable energy. So if you look at the statistics of carbon emissions, more than 2/3 of our carbon emissions yearly come from our use of fossil fuels for energy, for transportation, for different things, no, for temperature, for cooling. Yun. So since that's the main driver of carbon emissions, it also makes sense that for us to lessen carbon emissions, we also have to transition our energy systems. So here you can see windmills. So that's one of the most graphic, most visually appealing forms of renewable energy. But there are a lot of renewable energy technologies. We have wind, of course. We have solar. We have geothermal, biomass. We also have ocean technologies. Yeah, so we have a broad range of renewable energy technologies that we can use, preferably in a hybrid setting, preferably in a bigger energy system that is decentralized and takes into consideration the normal fluxes of wind and solar in a particular area, so that you can address the energy needs in a particular community, but at the same time lower the need for diesel-powered electricity and for coal-powered electricity. So in a nutshell, those are the technologies that we have to consider and innovations that we have to consider when we try to address the climate crisis. But we also have to remember that since technologies do not exist in a vacuum, it exists systems, social systems, political systems around these technologies. It also makes sense that if we change our technologies, if we transition our technologies, we have to consider the people surrounding it. So when we install renewable energy systems, it has to make sure that it can still address the needs of the people. It has to make sure that development remains equitable. And at the same time, it has to make sure that people actually benefit from the transition. Otherwise, they will just resist. They will just resist technological transition, since climate change, even though we know it's a very pressing issue, for a normal kumare or a normal nanay, she doesn't care about the problem 10 to 20 years from now if she can't even feed her own family. So
Right.
there's always a way to merge those two issues together. So you have to link our long-term solution, which is climate action and renewable energy transition, to systems and processes and innovations that would provide livelihoods to our fellow people. So that ends my discussion.
Very
Actually,
well said, Joshua.
um, very good insight yung sinabi mo na we have to double check yung other systems na once you install something, the technology and all those stuff, there's social aspect, there's cultural, right? So very important kasi we don't want to alienate yung mismong community when you do that. And I think pwede nga natin, ito yata yung, correct me if I'm wrong, yung sinasabi din ni Anne kanina na it should be area-based. So if it's really what the area needs and is that kumbaga yun lang ba yung meron doon or wala doon, so you have to check that as well. So
We always have to consider the context. Like for example, in Germany, it's a developed country. They have a lot of budget, no? And there's a lot of wind in the area. So if you see the kind of energy transition in Germany, you have wind farms at the northern part and then solar farms at the southern end. And then the energy they produce, they send it to the western side of Germany where the industries are. In the Philippine setting, we have an archipelago. We can do the same. We can do the energy transition the same way that they did, because one, our geography doesn't support it. At the same time, we don't have the same budget as Germany. So
That's
we have,
great.
in the context of the Philippines, you have to package it in such a way that it will be more palatable to people. At the same time, it would be more budget friendly. So if you would notice in certain islands, for example, particular electric cooperatives, they designed their transition in a way that it's part diesel and part solar. Unfortunately, there's still diesel, but for their particular context, that's the way to transition. Or in Eastern Samar, in Eastern Visayas rather, they have geothermal reserves there since it's a fault zone. So they can benefit more from that particular resource, which Germany doesn't have because they don't have a geothermal. They don't have geothermal reserves. So it always depends on the context, geography, culture, the economic capacity of the people. Yeah.
Can I also add, coming from what Joshua also mentioned, because I also was part of a project, mostly in Palawan, a hydro project and an off-grid island community project. And having done hydro project in Puerto Princesa and the off-grid island in Rojas municipality, we know Palawan is just one big island, but there are also smaller islands. And even if the hydropower in Puerto Princesa is able to provide 28%, it's a 6.8 megawatt mini hydro, it can only provide 28% of the energy requirement of Puerto Princesa. Therefore, there are other combination of energy systems that have to be installed in other island communities. And we encountered one problem in that community in Rojas, Palawan, because you need to ride a boat to be able to access that community, and you need to transfer the energy systems, the technology in a modular in modular form. So we had to ferry we had to make sure that we are able to load each part on a boat, and it should be enough. The boat should be enough to carry the capacity of that part. So it took a while before that small off-grid energy system was put up, and it's a combination of it's part solar, part biomass, and part wind system. However, there was a challenge in terms of putting up the transmission lines because for you to be able to put up transmission lines, you need posts. And
Yeah.
what posts do you use? There To lessen the cost, the local community used the Nara trees. However, DNR rules that it's illegal to use Nara trees because these are native species, and we cannot use them um, to put up
As
transmission lines.
post. Yeah.
And but the problem is it's a coastal community. The technology, the wiring is also eroded um, because of the what do you call it? The wind has a salt. The wind and the moisture. There's
Right.
salt component in it because of the
The
geographic
water. Yeah.
feature of the island. So how do you address these challenges? So it's important to also look into not just how do we make use of local resources, but how do we come up with technologies to address, to provide for the basic needs of our communities in specific contexts. And Anne was also mentioning how Masungi is a karst forest reserve. So there's a different approach to doing conservation in Masungi Geo Reserve.
Yeah, so there are a lot of logistical challenges din talaga, no?
Yeah.
Um,
And yeah.
Go
Yeah,
ahead, Joshua.
to add to my discussion and to Tiaza's comments, uh, we also have to take into consideration the relationship of of local cultures with the energy transition. As Anne mentioned earlier, pre-colonial era, we have our own systems, we have our own beliefs, and sometimes we have to accept that the kind of energy transition that a particular community needs might be no electricity at all. Like for example,
Right.
in Tanay Rizal, um,
Correct.
we visited the community where we were basically assessing the site for possible electrification and possible um, provision of solar panels. But the people there requested um, not to give them electricity because it distracts them from their normal cycles. They already have their lifestyles that have been in place for thousands of years, and um, and adding electricity or adding an energy source there might just disrupt that. So, in talking about energy transition, in talking about conservation, we have to consider that um, development might mean different things to different people.
yeah, that's true.
That's
I think
really
this is where the design thinking process can actually come in.
Mhm.
So the idea that it should be when you design innovation and other technology, it should be human centered. It's a human centered design wherein you take into account the bulk of the accountability should be more on what do they think they need, they want, what's their problem really, and not you thinking about them, because it should be more on the empathy side rather than just looking at the sympathy. Like, they don't have an electricity, so we have an electricity, so might as well give them electricity. So that's a very good example that you have right there. All right, so um with all of this, let's go back to our original our overarching theme, wherein with all of this information, with all of these facts that we have already laid down, your insights, your experiences, and we want to celebrate the 50th year of the Earth Day. So and there is this call to action to reduce the climate change, right? But we are experiencing these trying times, and we are experiencing global pandemic.
Yeah.
So how are we even relevant right now with all of these things that we're talking about? Climate change, call to action, area-based preservation, and then there's also logistical problems whenever we want to do the renewable energy and stuff. And yet we have this ultimate problem right now, like the short term, which is COVID-19. So how are we even relevant right now? Anyone can jump in.
Well, let me start first now. So, I think COVID actually made us more relevant. The reason why I think that's the case is because we COVID gave us a chance to experience addressing a global collective action issue in a very fast pace. No, we didn't have uh, we didn't have an experience before in human history where we had to work together as one one species. The whole humanity has to work together to fight COVID-19. And well, the reason why we were able to do that is because COVID-19, the impacts of COVID-19 is very fast. Parang from one day to another, thousands or of thousands are getting infected or unfortunately dying. So it's very graphic. Unlike in climate change, where the impacts happen slowly, it takes a while for you to actually see that, okay, this is an issue that we have to address. So now that we were able to simulate global action through COVID-19, at least we now have systems in place, hopefully. And we also have a collective experience when it comes to addressing global issues. So it's an opportunity, actually, more than like making us irrelevant.
Yeah. If I can also chime in, I think what makes this COVID experience, what makes climate action more relevant in the COVID experience, that we're GDP has taken a backseat, and you get to experience what life's like with less pollution. I think the first few weeks when Philippines went on lockdown, a lot of people said nga the sky is bluer. In Metro Manila, you can finally actually see blue skies instead of gray smog. And a lot of people are actually really enjoying this. And so, parang going back to what Anne was saying earlier, is GDP really the real proxy of happiness? In Joshua's story, that there's a family in Tanay that says electricity which is what we think is progress, isn't really what will make them happy. I think COVID shows us that there are some things we need to take more seriously, that maybe more forests, that would maybe bluer skies. And this is an opportunity where people really get to appreciate, parang, oh, ito pala, this is what it would be like if things were a little bit better, things were a bit more environmental. And yeah.
And
I
I think
recall, sorry, I'm still listening, I'm still around kahit papano. But I
Hey,
remember there was a certain post online on how this COVID-19 really made us reassess what we refer to as essential, right? Talking about essential workers and essential services, 'di ba? Parang yung mga before na mga jobs like farmers, pagiging basurero, waste management, actually, all of these things that we used to take for granted, all of a sudden we're referring to now as essential services and jobs. So
Yeah.
that's also something very revealing if you think about it.
yeah.
Even actually in terms of the transportation side, like people are now um getting this the idea, the concept of we want bikes, so na
Yeah.
people will share the road more. Let the people riding the bikes really ride their bikes without that without the fear of getting an accident.
Yeah.
Like a lot of medical workforce that we have, or health workers, depend on these bikes. Like now they feel that okay, we should have a bike pala. Kasi it's not just because it's healthy to ride a bike, but it's also in this trying times. Yun yung mas importante ngayon eh. So instead of having that gasoline pa, there's a need for gasoline, there's a need, and having that cars, kasi it's more on the more privileged people, right? To have their own car, your own their own transport mode of transportation. But for a lot of workers, healthcare workers, it's the bike that actually saved them as well.
Right. In
Yeah. So
conservation, in the conservation sphere, actually, there is a talk also on green jobs, right? Jobs that essentially help with conservation. So just
yeah.
imagine a world where all jobs, no matter the sector, actually contributes back to um, conservation. Baka in that way, we actually have a chance at the planet in balance, no? Because there is a way that sectors can contribute to this. There just has to be like a huge realignment of resources and time and energy. Yeah.
Yeah. So well,
Anyway,
so since you're already talking about that green jobs, what are the other roles of each sectors kaya? So while we are doing this climate action, call to climate action, as well as COVID-19 fight for COVID-19, what would be the role of each sectors?
Um, I can start with two important sectors, the economy and politics. From trying to tie environmental challenges and in the context of COVID and this global health pandemic in general. In terms of economic pillars, businesses, regardless of size, will and as we have seen, are greatly affected. And given the uncertainty of our times, we are starting to see how the concept of too big to fail, particularly in major corporations, are being challenged. We've seen this in 2008 during the global economic meltdown in the US, and which also affected other parts of the world. And now, because of the global pandemic, we have seen how businesses are forced to shut down, and there are projections by economists about how we will enter into one of the major economic recessions of our times. Global and local supply chains that rely heavily on environmental inputs will have less natural resources to draw from. And this affects production of basic necessities. And we have seen how there's a lot of shortage in medical supplies in hospitals, not just in the Philippines, but in in bigger countries like the US. And I was during our candid discussion before we started recording. I was talking about investments and how those corporations that rely heavily on coal and carbon-intensive industries will have to deal with stranded assets, which are a result of environmental related risk factor, and they will suffer economic losses after assets have become more of a liability. So, for instance, Mizuho Financial Group in Japan announced that they will stop financing the new coal projects. In the area of politics, environment, especially environment degradation, climate change, and global health crisis, or even local health crisis, will become a new threat to security. And these changes in the
It's 9 o'clock.
health and environmental systems will challenge governments to think beyond traditional means of addressing security challenges. So it will no longer be military approaches, but rather a new form of collaboration and cooperation, such as looking at best practices, sharing of expertise. So we have to be more open to participatory and collaborative governance guided by experts.
Wow, yeah, that's some actually good ideas. I think you have mentioned some post-COVID challenges already, or actually those are challenges right now, pala, with the different sectors and the opportunities that could be done with that. Hmm. Anyone who wants to add to that? So
Hello.
yeah,
Hello.
sure.
Yeah. So well, he has a talk more about the macro side
Mm,
in investments, etc. But I think we have to also consider the sectors at the more grassroots level. As we saw in this pandemic and COVID, the sectors we can rely on are the sectors that are closer to the ground. So the education sector, our LGUs, our waste management systems, etc., etc. So we have to we also have to recognize that in transitioning to a new system, um, all of our changes, all of our propositions will rest on a foundation of these basic sectors. Uh, I think one of the main roles of these sectors, and one of the main ways of promoting the energy transition and promoting climate action is to educate the basic sectors. So teaching the teachers how to promote more environmentally friendly practices, like motivating the LGs to transition to renewable energy. So if we focus on these um, on the foundational systems, it would be much easier to propose big investments in renewable energy, to promote national or even international policies on climate action, since the people who actually vote for these people are already convinced.
Yeah. So, what do you think? How can we shape the new norm then during this global pandemic?
Again, when it comes to technological transitions, I think education and learning is a first step. No? So it's a way to create more people who will rethink and reboot our current systems. Currently, the way we address these kinds of issues is through a centralized approach. So there are experts who develop ideas and then they try to roll it out all across the world. But we have to take inspiration from nature. Nature doesn't thrive on one size fits all solutions. It allows systems to evolve according to context. It
Correct.
thrives on diversity, and creating a new system should also take inspiration from what nature does.
Yeah, actually, as we speak right now, I think, or since January or February nga, I think there are a lot of people, a lot of Filipinos that has been creating a lot of solutions on technology side, on the agricultural side to do the food security. Actually, Global Shapers Manila Hub has been coordinating with the Department of Agriculture right now for the food security through our colleague Cherry Atilano and our colleagues like Pax. Uh, um, he's actually one of the Masa Healthy Incorporated. He's the founder and CEO, and he's our colleague, right? And then he is the one giving this from one uh, um, stock of vegetables, delivering it to different houses. So
Household. Yeah.
yeah, it's a door to door thing, right? So
Yeah, so he's directly connecting. So he's trying to remove the middleman and directly connecting the farmers to the end consumers. So us, households. Yeah.
So basically, people are also grouping and doing this a lot of initiatives, even if nobody's asking them. So that's like nature. Kumbaga, para silang kabute. Everybody's just popping everywhere, like solution here, solution there. So yeah, it's true,
Yeah.
Joshua. We're like the nature itself. Kabute nga lang. We're
Right.
everywhere. Solutions
Right.
everywhere.
Right.
Sorry,
And
I had to go
actually,
back and laugh a little.
sorry, Anne?
Sorry, natawa
And
lang ako.
actually,
I had to
yeah.
go on.
No, because I was just jumping off what Rage said. So all of these small solutions, these are for people who are actually nobody's asking them to do anything, but it also highlights the power of single action. How it takes one person's idea, one person's I guess decision to act, and it can make a big change. No matter how small you think your action can be, it can start a ripple, right? And I don't know, but maybe just as another just as a quick question to all of you, like, what do you think are very easy actions that anyone watching can do to help with the to help fight climate change? Let's start with Tiaza, maybe.
I think I would leave the more specific comments to Joshua and Anne. I would maintain the overall more macro approach or more macro perspective para consistent din yung discussion yung assertion ko. At the beginning of COVID, I was thinking this challenge is no different from what we face in the environment and sustainability community. And we were actually joking how it can be possible that we can just press a reset button and just start over with 2020, because we're just in the first quarter of 2020 and a lot has happened, not just in the Philippines but globally. And maybe this is actually the reset that we actually need. It's not that we have to reset 2020, but the 2020 on its own is the reset to challenge and look into pervasive and systemic inequality, unjust social structures, and nonstop economic exploitation. Because what I noticed that, as Joshua mentioned, people have been ignoring climate change and environmental degradation, and maybe this is really a call to action, like with COVID and the interface of health and planetary systems. It's really telling us, guys, this is as real as it can get, and what do we have to do as a community, from the local to the national to the global level. So I think we're given the chance and opportunity to revise and to review the systems that the economic, social, political systems that cost us then what was normal, and what would be the new normal. So it's really more of a lot of internalization and looking for more ways to collaborate and just be humble with what nature is telling us.
Right, that's great. Next, let's hear from Joshua.
Hi. Yeah, so I think one of can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay. So I think some of the more specific actions that we can do now, particularly now that we're staying at home, we can still do a lot. We can educate our peers. We can educate our family with regards to environmental issues, or things as simple as eating more vegetables. Since agriculture comprises like a fifth of global emissions. So now that we were forced to rethink our own lifestyles, it's also an opportunity for us to lower our consumption to a level that is hopefully collectively would be more within the planetary boundaries. It also parang one of the things that we can do now and hopefully after COVID is to support local industries, buy local, support the people within our community, because aside from it building local resilience, it's also more climate friendly. There's not a lot of transportation involved there. So you're helping your community, you're helping the earth. And also lastly, I think now that we're safe at home, it's the best time to think about the leaders we will elect. That we hope and more environmentally friendly come 2020.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
so right. Yeah.
Sorry, if I may just plug this in. Today we also launched a open letter addressed to, well, basically everyone. It's a call for care for nature, especially in light of the COVID-19 crisis. And plug, please sign it. Please
Yes,
sign it.
I've
We're
signed it.
going to put
I
up an
think.
additional sign up form.
we all signed it, so you signed it.
There have a sign.
Right. So if you look at that open letter, we've actually outlined a few things that certain sectors can also participate in and do moving forward.
Maybe Anne, you can share some of that in this webinar, just so people can have a taste of what it is you guys have suggested.
Right. It connects to what Josh was saying a while ago, no? As consumers, as members of the public, we really have that responsibility to vote for our leaders, choose the ones that actually would choose to prioritize nature, diba? So let's look for people who have a track record on that and not just base our votes on, personality and or statements. Track record when it comes to solving environmental crisis, and also track record when it comes to listening to science, right? And of course, may components din dito na when it comes to our leaders. We hope that our leaders could prioritize planetary health, quality of life approach, more than just, as was what we've been saying a while ago pa, simply GDP numbers, right? We need them to make those changes. For the academe, we need them to guide students and young ones towards regaining their rootedness in nature. That has to be a part of the curriculum as early as kindergarten. And we really need a radical change also, diba, in our educational system so that we can create and mold people towards that direction, diba? Sabi nga ng isa kong kasama in conservation, we need an education system guided by science and con-science or conscience. So,
Consent.
importante yun for us. For the private sector, we definitely can't go on as if it's business as usual. We need to embrace the circular economy, right? We need to minimize the impact that we make on the environment, and we need to help government. If you're looking at conservation, if I may share, I think I've mentioned this to some of you before. The funding gap for conservation annually in the
Yeah.
Philippines is at 83%. We have 10 years till 2030. Do you think that if we leave this with government, with the resources that they currently have, we'll get anywhere? Hindi eh. It's actually really urgent already for everyone to get moving and for all sectors to pitch in where they can. It's an emergency. It really is.
Yeah.
On my end, I think going back to a more local perspective, like on a more ground perspective, I think people while doing this while practicing the staying at home or social distancing concept, well, I think people can actually help in terms of one, segregating your waste properly. Have that habit wherein if before you have no time to really segregate it or even know what the types of garbage that we should have or should not have or where to put it. Maybe you have the time now because you're doing the stay at home. Second, um, giving value to alternative greener transportation such as bikes. So since some people already experience biking to work because there's no transportation available, maybe now some of us can now realize that it's actually good to bike to work. You can stay healthy as well as make sure that you don't add to the pollution of Metro Manila or wherever you are. And just practice safety first for everyone. All you have to have your bike and all those stuff. And finally, I think for me, just three things. The last one would be empathy. Hopefully, while doing this, while we're here fighting for two things, one is a global pandemic and the other one is climate change. We're also practicing the idea and the concept of empathy. Well, empathy itself is not something that's innate kasi eh. I think it's more on you develop it. It's a habit that you develop and then it becomes integrated with your whole life. Now, since we are in a lockdown from what March 14, 15 or 12 until now. So you have like they said that within 7 days it should be like a habit already. When you practice something for 7 days straight, it should become somewhat a habit, and then from the habit it becomes part of your life. So everybody can start with that. So from that three things, you can segregate your waste properly at home. Um, uh, biking to work, biking to grocery stores, wherever you want to go, and then finally empathy. So practice empathy for everybody.
That's right. And I think there's still a week into the enhanced community quarantine that ends on April 30. So definitely enough time to still build that habit in.
Sorry. Meron pa actually. There's one thing I'd like to add since
Go for it, Anne.
since we started talking about empathy. There's still a lot of change that simply voicing out something can do, right? So one example of that is recently we put up a photo of a forest fire happening in the vicinity of Masungi. And a lot of people expressed their opinions on it, expressed dismay, shared and liked it. I think the number of likes came up to the thousands pa, and the shares were also really a lot. So what happened was the very next day, the Bureau of Fire was around, the police was around, and in less than a week's time, there was an order for DENR to have a fire brigade response team despite the lockdown. And not just that, the forest rangers can actually move through checkpoints faster too. And all of that just because of a single photo and a lot of people sharing it.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice to hear. That's the power of collective.
Yeah, it makes a difference.
But I think there are also uh, there's a distinguishing factor between sympathy and empathy. Hopefully, those people who just like it will not stop with the liking only.
Yeah.
Well, thank God, because something happened with the liking and the photo. But after the photo and stuff, hopefully it's just more than the liking and the expression of
Sharing. Yeah.
True.
sharing is more on the sympathy side, but empathy goes more. If you act on it, then that's empathy.
Yeah.
But of course, sympathy is the first step, so go.
Oh, progress na rin
Yeah.
yan. Getting there. Getting there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just one more step and then you're there. All right, I think this is a lovely discussion with everybody. Hopefully, mas marami pang makasama sa discussion natin next time. Let's see what's our discussion next time. We'll see the topic. But anyway, thank you so much for everybody here. Joshua, Tiesa, Hillary, and
Enrich. Enrich.
Moderated.
Thank you, Rich, for moderating.
thanks. So, yun, thank you so much for your expertise, your time and effort for explaining a lot of things. hopefully you can touch more lives after this. Ingat kayo, keep safe, stay at home.